and that, like my wife does, and thinks tiny, it's a fad, it's a little side thing. But in terms of scale, what's it worth as a market?
Gaming in particular, the industry is worth 180 billion pounds a year.
Amazing.
Whereas football, 45 billion.
Hello everybody, it's another unedited conversation with me, Ed Gould, and I've got one word for you to kick off. Nerd! Yeah, it's all about nerd culture today. And if you remember Revenge of the Nerds, that awesome film back in the day that really vilified those geeks with the glasses and the jocks, bullied them all the way through university and college, just imagine what's changed. Elon Musk rules the world. There's people like Taylor Swift with their Swifties creating new fandoms and nerd culture. And that is what today is about. It's a bit of a confusing intro, but that's because I'm so excited, because I'm recording this intro directly after talking to Calvin Innes, who comes from a specialist agency that focuses on nerd culture and fandom. What is nerd culture and fandom? You might have an idea, but if you're any type of marketing leader, it's something you need to know about in more detail. Why? Because, I mean, even the UK, just alone, it's worth about 300 billion. And in this talk, Calvin and I are going to get into the rise of nerd culture and fandom, where it stemmed from, the early days of things like Star Wars moving into the X-Files and Lord of the Rings, and then K-pop and all of these different tribes that are creating so much commercial gain for brand leaders. We're then going to dig into, if you're interested, the shift from audiences to fandom. So if you're a marketing leader, if you are a CMO, I bet you're having lots of meetings about how can I build communities, marketing audiences. Well, we're going to talk about how you can build fandoms and what the differences between audience and fandoms are. Also, and this is a really important point, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the trials and the tribulations, how you can cock it up if you are running one of these fandoms is very easily. So when you've got such an intensely passionate audience of people buying your product, one wrong move and it can go the wrong way. So we're going to look at some examples of successfully navigated fandom engagement. We might touch on a few failures in that space as well, but navigating that fandom landscape is really important to get right. And then at the end, we're going to go into a bit of a conversation about how do I educate the rest of my team and the CMO or the MD or the CEO or the board on why I should spend money on connecting my brand, my business, and my marketing plan to this world of nerd culture and fandoms. How do I explain that? How do I educate the leadership? What sort of things does Calvin do in him and his agency team to make sure everyone's on the same page? So it, as is every conversation on the Unedited podcast, is a little bit different. And by the end of this, I promise you, you will understand the value and the route to creating fandoms for your own organization. At the end as well, as is usual, Calvin will let us into his secret, most important tip. So make sure you listen all the way to the end. Is there anything else? I don't think so, other than to say, sit back, relax, and let's get ready for another unedited conversation. Cool. Welcome, everybody, to the Black Box Studio here at Castle Gould HQ. Today, we are talking all things nerd culture with my pal, Calvin. Hi, Calvin. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, mate. How are you?
I'm okay, and I know he's let me into a secret. He's been up all night with 6 kids, so we're going to have to try and tease the energy out of Calvin today. But I'm positive, having spoken to him before, he's got something great for all of you listeners. And as is normal on our pod, let's start with you, Calvin, telling us a bit about who you actually are, where you are, what you do. Give us a bit of context.
Cool. Yes, I'm Calvin Innes. I'm currently the general manager and creative director at JVM Nerd London. So we're a specialist pop culture and nerd culture agency. I've worked in marketing for 20 odd years now. Started off in traditional marketing, worked for most major agencies, kind of used to get helicoptered in as a creative director. on various projects. And then over the last sort of 6 or 7 years, I've lent heavily into the nerd culture marketing because it's the stuff that I enjoy. You can kind of clearly see behind me, I'm slightly obsessed with toys and comics and trainers and that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's kind of been my focus for the last half a decade now.
And if you're listening to this pod, guys, and you're not watching it, I suggest this is the one just to go in and have a look, just to have a look at his background. I'm staring across it now. It's Louis, producer Louis. We need to invest more in our set because this guy's got it all covered. So I think the starting point, though, is really to try and help our listeners understand that might not understand what nerd culture is. How do you define nerd culture, and what do you mean by nerd culture and fandom, and how does that manifest itself in a marketing space for you guys?
Yes, I mean, it's interesting. It's kind of like it's on a few different levels, really. Nerd culture really is about so nerds, I suppose, are really people who are heavily invested, heavily knowledgeable, passionate about something, whatever that might be. There's kind of an unhealthy level of obsession, I suppose, sometimes. So somebody who's a nerd around comics, they don't just collect comics, they don't just read comics, they love comics, they live it, it's part of their life. Same with anime, same with Pokémon, same with gaming, whatever it might be. A nerd is somebody who is kind of like really heavily invested into that particular thing. And that's where it kind of gets interesting, in that it doesn't have to be a nerdy thing, really. I mean, you can be a nerd on cars, you can be a nerd on sports, you can be a nerd on music. The idea is the same thing, but you're essentially a super fan, I suppose. So from a business point of view, a marketing point of view, that's kind of what you want. Nobody wants a fan when they can have a super fan. Nobody wants an audience when they can have a fandom. So the idea is nerd culture is you have these hugely passionate audiences that you can tap into.
And what sort of scale are we talking about on this? Because I think if you're anything like some of the people I work with, they sort of look at some of the stuff I've got in terms of toys and interests, and like my wife does, and thinks it's tiny, it's a fad, it's a little side thing. But in terms of scale, from a business point of view, what's it worth as a market?
Oh man, it's if you look at gaming in particular, the industry is worth 180 billion pounds a year, whereas football is worth 45 billion a year. It dwarfs it. It's absolutely colossal. You look at kind of spending on toys. So £1 in every £3 spent on toys is for the kidult market. It's for people like you and me who are buying robots and collectible items and things to display. It's
highly essential items like home robots and
Exactly.
dinosaur models. Yeah,
exactly. And it's like the thing with the kidult market is it's kind of you've got a lot of people who are, like I say, I'm 41 now. I've kind of grown up. I have a job. I'm still into the same stuff as I used to be. It's just now you have a certain level of disposable income where you can get the stuff that you really wanted as a kid. And the market has it's steamrolled over the last few years. It is growing so quickly, it's insane. And then across to gaming again.
So as an agency, as a creative director in an agency, so tell us a little bit about the age, because it's really, when you were telling me about this before, it's a really interesting concept. So the agency focuses specifically on this area. Where's it based? What's the sort of scale, and what sort of clients are you working with day to day?
So we're based in, so I head up the London team. So we're based in Shoreditch. We launched the London office about 5 months ago. The agency was originally founded in Hamburg about 5 years ago. We also have an office in Shanghai. Launching the London office it opens the door into a lot of new businesses because nerd culture is so accepted in the UK. So I think across the entire agency, across the whole of Nerd, we have about 30 people between Hamburg, London and Shanghai. And yeah, the London office it's interesting in that when you're looking at other countries and how nerd culture is accepted. In Germany, there's a huge nerd culture in Germany, but it's a little bit more reserved. It's still seen as being kind of a geeky, nerdy thing. Whereas in the UK, because it is such an integral part of the UK kind of makeup, you got Doctor Who, you got Sherlock Holmes, you got kind of like it's part of UK culture, so it's much more accepted. So it's almost easier to have conversations in the UK, which is obviously why we opened the UK office. As far as kind of the clients that we work with, it's interesting because we work with a lot of what we call endemics. Endemics are where it's a business that's already in this space. So it might be a gaming producer. It might be somebody who works with anime brands. It might be something that is involved in the nerd space. But then some of the most interesting projects come from the non-endemics, and these are the businesses that have nothing to do with nerd culture. But by partnering with a nerd culture IP, or by looking at gamification, or by looking at how they can get involved in the kidult market, they can reach a new audience, they can engage with their current audience in new ways, and they can do something different. They can do something completely different. The gamification element is a huge thing, absolutely huge. And if you imagine take the most boring thing possible, you're doing a health and safety onboarding process for a business. Nobody enjoys that. It's not fun. It's dry. It's boring. But if you can inject some gamification elements into that, you can turn it into a little bit of a competition. You can make it a playable thing where you can like level up by answering certain questions right and following through a process to kind of gain achievements and rewards. Then all of a sudden you've taken this incredibly boring thing, but vital thing, and you've made it fun. And that's kind of the bit that a lot of businesses are starting to come around to now.
So let me get this right. So we've got, just to summarize where we've got these audiences or these tribes of nerds or fans that are viciously addicted to a certain topic. And in my reading of that, when I think about myself doing that, it's less about the actual, it's almost like I own that. It's my world. It's nothing to do with the brand. So you guys as an agency, you're trying to bridge that gap between these groups of individuals that are absolutely crying out for every bit of extra footage, different toys, behind the scenes stuff, all of those sorts of things, like Tumblr blogs, all of these things. And you're finding ways to connect brands and activities in the marketing space to those. Is that what the agency's about?
Yes, yeah, partly. Yeah, it's a big part of what we do. Because I think you kind of get a lot of pop culture agencies now, or pop culture divisions of agencies.
Yeah.
Because it's clearly a kind of growing market. But what we work really hard to make sure we're not doing is just making partnerships that don't make sense, that don't actually speak to the fandom,
or aren't authentic.
Exactly, because that's what it's about. Fandoms are fantastic to work with and deal with if you do it in the right way. They're also vicious and they will push back, and they will spot something that is disingenuous straight away. And it's very hard to pull back from that. So making sure that any collaborations and any work that you do actually makes sense and speaks to the lore behind that fandom, or kind of gives the fans something new, but something that feels like it's authentic. That's the key to kind of doing sort of successful campaigns.
So can a brand or a business develop its, because many of our listeners out there have probably been taught audience development. It's all about how do I create my audience. So I guess the next bit we should look at is what is the difference between that approach of developing audiences or communities. That's another word that comes up a lot in our world. What's the difference between doing that for a business or a brand and trying to create a fandom? And can you create a fandom, or does it create itself, in your opinion?
Well, that's kind of the key point. Is I think the simplest way of looking at it is building an audience is relatively linear. You're growing an audience that is you advertise in a certain way, you put content out in a certain way, and your audience begins to grow, hopefully. A fandom is something a little bit different. A fandom is a little bit more organic. And that comes with difficulties as well, because controlling a fandom that is pushing back is a difficult thing that I think a lot of people have kind of experienced across social media in recent years as well. But a fandom has the ability to grow a brand in completely different ways. The fandom is passionate about the brand. They're much more invested. They feel much more personal around it. So if you look at something like, you could probably argue that Adidas has a fandom rather than an audience, because it's people who are fiercely passionate about the brand. I myself have like 40 pairs of Adidas trainers on the wall behind me.
Yeah, it
It's
looks like
people
the
who
shop I went to the other day.
it's literally, it's kind of it goes beyond just an audience will buy something when they are sold to, or whether they're educated about something, then they'll make a purchasing decision. A fandom will add additional information in and help kind of that audience, help that brand grow in completely different ways. A lot of the time that were completely unexpected by the brand in the first place, but it sort of takes on a life of its own, which is hugely powerful. And also at the same time, you have to be careful, and it has to be kind of controlled and monitored as well.
Yeah. Well, maybe to help our listeners understand, maybe we throw a couple of examples out there, and I'll show you mine and you show me yours in this. But one of the ones that comes to mind, which is, I guess, one of when I was thinking about this the other day, a lot of people might incorrectly think, well, this is entertainment. It's entertainment management rather than pure marketing. But if I think of Taylor Swift and the Swifties and the sort of impact of the Swifties and that brand, and it is a brand, it's not, the people running those channels. And I was reading something about Taylor Swift's fandom approach, and there's, her fans are incentivized by the mere idea of being retweeted or reshared or commented or getting a message. But they did a bit of a study, and that there was a pure correlation between how much those people were spending on the kit, or how much of work they were doing to promote the Taylor Swift brand. And you start seeing holes in the sort of idea. It starts to become a bit mechanical. Now, that's from the inside out looking at that. Do you recognize that as something that's going too far, or is that a great example of someone that's worked the idea of fandom from a commercial point of view to the nth degree?
Yeah, well, it's a balancing act between commercializing the fandom and remaining loyal to the fandom. And obviously, it's a business. Taylor Swift is a business at the end of the day. So to be able to monetize everything that she's doing makes a lot of sense. There's a danger that there's always a danger that you can then become a little bit too commercial. But the problem is if you become purely invested in the fandom and only catering to the fandom, you can also miss out on the actual commercial needs as well. So most of the time you're talking about a business or you're talking about a brand. So it is a balancing act. It's a little bit of give and take. I think Taylor Swift, realistically, whatever you think of music or anything else, is as a business case, I think is unbelievable.
It's about as good as it gets as a commercial example. Is there other examples? Is there other examples maybe in a different space other than music that spring to mind that could help our listeners sort of conceptualize how this hits the road?
I think if you look at anything around sort of Disney, Disney builds something that is far beyond kind of just a product, and it's got loyal, dedicated, fiercely dedicated fans, and it's across a huge ecosystem as well. I think they do particularly well. I mean, it's in the music space again, but if you're looking at K-pop, you look at kind of the army that's built up around BTS. I mean, that is a sometimes slightly scary fandom, but it is absolutely colossal. It is huge. It's a massive.
I think a lot of people, unless you sort of look into K-pop, you will not believe the scale of the sort of business control, creation. I mean, there's whole factories out there trying to drive, because there's such a commercial gain. And it's an interesting, I think, when I step back as a marketeer and think about it as a human and as a fan, it is that balance, isn't it? Because, am I a fan of something, or am I a follower of a brand? And it's how that's such a dodgy seesaw to be riding on for the fan and the brand. So I imagine there's plenty of examples where things go wrong and they get called out, and that's the end of that sort of approach. But K-pop's a great example.
K-pop's a really interesting one, in that the growth of K-pop over the last sort of few years has been absolutely phenomenal worldwide. So we've recently run a study in the UK that we'll be releasing in the next sort of few weeks, that looks at fandom across the whole of the UK and kind of the top fandom IPs, and we looked at the growth of K-pop and the passionate fandoms around K-pop is like unbelievable. So
even in
the
the
audience,
UK, it's
even in the
already
UK,
latched in, and
yeah, I mean, when you're looking at kind of the how passionate somebody is around a particular IP or a particular brand, anything in the K culture, K drama, K pop sort of arena is yeah, the fandom around it is this huge, absolutely huge. People are fiercely passionate and fiercely dedicated to the IPs, to the brands within that space. And that's something that I think you're going to see a lot of brands leaning into over the next couple of years. It's already there in other parts of the world. In the UK, it's a growing market. But I think definitely over the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to see a lot more brands leaning into gay culture.
I mean, the clues are there. I saw a couple of you started seeing producers shifting into the TV programs around K-pop and building, taking people over there. So it's almost like, I mean, you forget how much work goes into laying the foundations for some of these things sometimes, but it's already there and it's happening. So this report you guys are publishing, this is really interesting because I heard about this report from a sports agency the other day, and they were looking at women's football and how much that's improved and increased fandom of sports. And the numbers that they were running, obviously there's big differences between the numbers of men's sports and female sports, but that added market from a commercial point of view has absolutely taken it to another level in terms of what it's worth in the UK. So when you guys are looking at the UK fandom market, is there any other sort of things from that report that stand out for you as headlines that CMOs or marketing leaders need to be aware of that you want to share?
I think one of the most interesting things is comparing this whole nerd fandom space to traditional sports, and how much obviously gaming has overtaken traditional sports in a really big way as far as kind of how big the audiences are and how engaged the audiences are. And what this has sort of led to, and this is already happening, is a kind of blending of the two spaces. So you've got things like the baller league. The baller league is a perfect example. It's I think it's marketing genius. It's a really cool concept. It's working really well. I think there's going to be more of that because realistically, to appeal to a younger audience and also appeal to the hardcore sports fans, there has to be a cross pollination between social media, between digital media, and traditional sports. You're seeing it with the recent stuff in literally this week with the basketball game, where there was the overlay of the court, and it basically looks like you're playing a video game in a live broadcast. And finding ways to kind of cross these areas, I think, is key to the future of sports and entertainment.
I think you could go further. I think it's key to any brand or any business trying to engage in what is now probably the biggest market that's going to make them money. We're so used to, anyone under our age is so used to having sensory overload. The sports game isn't enough. What happens in between? And actually that, whatever those brands are, a clothes brand, it's not enough just to buy the shoe. You want to put it on your wall, as I can see behind you, and be driving that and be part of that. So I think you bang on, and it's almost, where does that end? But that's an exciting proposition for creative directors because it means that you can make all sorts of amazing stuff.
I mean, it's opened up this entire world now where you can, if you look at Roblox is obviously one of the fastest growing platforms in the world. It's huge.
It's the scourge of our household, by the way. Just as a heads up, there's been
exactly
some unofficial spending going on.
Oh yeah, you're not telling me about it. But it's also kind of it opens up these possibilities that have just never been there before, never. And it's kind of like, and things that obviously when I was younger would have seemed a million miles away. But the idea of being able to buy a pair of trainers, a limited edition pair of trainers that you can display, but then you can kind of own as well, and then the same pair of trainers you can wear within a game as a digital asset, and that's an relatively easy thing to do now, and it makes so much more sense from a brand's point of view to be able to appeal to a digital world and a physical world as well. I think brands are heavily leaning into that now, but I think there's still a lot of room for brands to explore it more.
I think you bang on. It's also about the holy grail of how do I add value without adding cost? I can add value to a product set with moves like that without really significantly adding any cost to the production or the manufacture of that pairs of shoes. And suddenly, as we blend the simulated with the authentic, you've got like a double-ended product that gives you a bit more reason to buy that over the next. So it's really cool. Let me pull you back a bit though, because we're in agreement. We've got these huge markets that are only just going to get bigger and bigger. And as the aging population sort of carries on, we've got to find roots into these new markets, and fandom and nerd culture and the ideas that are coming out of that approach are obviously going to offer great value for marketeers and creatives and for brands. But that point around navigating the landscape, I think for our listeners and people I work with, I can imagine getting them to believe in the first instance, but helping them navigate that landscape as an advisor, as a trusted advisor as you are with your clients. How do you begin to make sure that the brands approach that in the right way and they don't go over the board and they don't ruin the relationship? And what sort of steps do you guys talk about to navigate it effectively?
So if we take, for example, a brand looking to partner with, they're looking to partner with a particular IP, or they're looking to partner with, they know they want to do something in this space and they want a suggestion of which IPs to partner with. It starts by understanding the client's brand, who their audience is. So we talk to them about who their current audience is, who their buyers are, the age groups, the demographics that kind of make up their current audience. And then we look at kind of where there's potentially crossovers with current IPs. And is the same kind of market? Are there the same ages and demographics that where there's a crossover there? So, for example, Pokémon, if you're working with a cosmetics brand, we look at kind of how big each audience is, where the audience is made up of, the age groups of each audience, and at some point there is a crossover. There's a crossover where it's the same audience in the same space, but that's not the end of it. At that point, you then have to make sure that if you're doing a collaboration, it is genuine. So it's as much as it is about understanding Pokemon and the brand and the nerd IP, it's also about understanding the actual brand looking to work with them. Because if that collaboration is going to make sense, it has to feel genuine. It has to be something that's kind of like you're not forcing it in there. Anybody can do that. Anybody can go to a licensing expo and buy the rights for a brand, and they can stick it on a cap or a pair of shoes or a water bottle, but to do these collaborations that actually make sense is building a story around it, and it's adding something to the lore, and it's kind of like it's doing something that feels like it's more than just a cheap branding exercise, and most of the time this then leads on to a much more successful investment for the brand, because they're investing in something that isn't just a really quick branding exercise. It's something where they can get 6 months, 12 months worth of content. They can do cross-platform. They can, yes, sometimes have a product at the end of it, but also kind of work across social media and work across PR to get attention. And yeah, it's kind of like it essentially comes down to understanding the IP and the brand. And then at the same time, a lot of the time,
as is a marketeer's main job. That's it. Isn't it? Is that a surprise for the brands you work with? Do they come to you saying, tell you what, this fandom thing's going quite well. Why don't we buy ourselves a bit of a community over here? Do you have to educate the brands that you're working with, or on the whole are they, because that's a great example, perfume and Pokemon, what a great sort of thing to think about of how you merge those, and everything you're saying is making sense. But I could imagine it might take a while to get them to understand why you need to do so much in that to make it authentic.
Yeah, there's always an education piece, like always, because it's fairly obvious, I think, to a lot of brands that tying themselves to a globally known popular IP, that'd be cool. That kind of makes sense. We're going to sell some units off the back of that.
And it's always been there, like sticking a bottle of whiskey in the back of James Bond. Product placement's been there for donkey's years.
Yeah, exactly. But it's kind of.
But the data on the data on that shows it's not that effective. So like getting deeper connections in is obviously where we need to go. How do you start getting the CMO, the marketing leader, the career, when you're sat in that meeting and they're going, oh, here's a guy in a bloody red hat and he's gonna, oh, here we go. We're going to get, and so they're very excited because you're different and you're talking about something new. But how do you move that into a space of faith? What techniques do you use to get people to believe?
It's all about numbers completely. When it comes to kind of you and I talking, or it comes to somebody who is a fan talking, you can talk about the cool IPs, you can talk about the cool projects you can do all day long, and that's fine. The minute you have to actually get somebody to sign off and reach into the pocket, it's numbers. That's it. And if you can explain, like, this is the size of your audience, this is the number of your audience that fits into this space, that likes this IP. This is the size of this IP's audience, and by
suddenly their ears prick up and they might listen a little bit more about.
Yeah, you've almost got to take out the whole thing of kind of like, this is the cool nerdy IP bit. It's obviously a huge part of it. It's very, very important, but it means nothing unless you can back it up with financial, some actual stats and figures behind it that make sense. And at that point, it makes everything else a little bit easier as well.
And have you seen that change over the years that you've been doing this? Has there been a shift in the perception of this? How's it evolved since you guys started? And actually, when you're talking to the guys in Hamburg, where they started this all off, how's that trajectory worked for them?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, especially when you start looking at Hamburg. So there's definite cultural differences between the UK and Germany. And when it comes to fandom as well, I think, sort of mentioned earlier on, fandom in the UK is much more mainstream. It's much more accepted. I mean, you go down the street wearing an anime t-shirt, it's kind of quite cool. It's fine. You wear it under your suit, everyone thinks it's cool. In Germany, fandom is very big, but it is a little bit more underground. It is a little bit more niche still, whereas it's seen as being it's a cooler thing in the UK. I think it is more accepted. And that has played into how businesses accept this as well. So I think in Germany and a lot of other countries at the moment, to be honest, you're having to explain why nerd culture and fandom is important. And that's the initial conversation. And once you've explained it, once you've kind of got into it, that's fine. In the UK, you don't have to have that conversation as much. You do a little bit, but it's much more readily accepted. And that's been a gradual change, probably over the last sort of like decade, definitely 5 or 6 years maybe, where as you've seen, I mean, all of the top film IPs in the last sort of few years, it's all nerd culture. You're starting to get crossovers in fashion that are genuinely impressive. So you're not just sticking a logo on stuff. I mean, you've got like Gentle Monster and Tekken doing the sunglasses that was like mind-blowingly good. You've got like Jimmy Choo and Sailor Moon. It's stuff that is kind of like it's fashion and fandom crossing over in a really genuine, impressive, cool way. This kind of stuff has gone a really long way to making people accept that, you know, there is an audience here. There's something to sort of look into.
Why do you think that is culturally? Is it we're closer to America and it's been driven from there, or is it that what's your take on that as someone that's working within that? Because it's not just, okay, we can all pretend we're cooler than the Germans, but that's just not the truth, is it? If you go to the Bergheim, you'll work that one out. But it's how is it that these cultural differences do lead to this? And are we closer to the center of this idea, do you think, as an English-speaking nation?
So I think there's two things. I think from a German point of view, Germany is traditionally the country of poets and books, and it's kind of like it leans very heavily away from nerd culture. So it's why things like Gamescom in Cologne every year is so big, because it's an opportunity for the Germans to go there and just unleash and be like, we can be nerdy for a few days. I think it's an inbuilt thing as part of it's a traditional thing where it's a longer stretch. It's a bigger stretch, I think, for them to lead into nerd culture. In the UK, the UK is a sponge. It always has been. It is for food. It is for music. It is for fashion. It is for fandom. So it quite readily accepts all of this input from around the world and then kind of makes it its own.
Remodels it, makes it our own,
Yeah,
and spins it out
exactly.
again. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we're also
That's why I love our country. That's why I love our country. Okay, let's switch it up a little bit if we can. One of the things that a lot of our listeners and a lot of the people that I've traditionally worked with are probably not in the consumer space. They're probably doing what would traditionally be called B2B. And there's still like this sort of, I'm fighting constantly this sort of perception that, well, we're B2B, so we do B2B stuff. Even though I'm a huge fan of just saying, aren't we all humans? Haven't we all got the same levers and the same? When you think about applying this sort of approach to more corporate environments, have you got any examples or thoughts on, because a lot of our listeners will be thinking that's great if you're a perfume company and you're trying to do a Pikachu fragrance, but we make software, we make technology, we're a services company. Are there examples of ways that these sorts of CMOs and marketing leaders should be waking up and grabbing this as an opportunity?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, you sort of mentioned it. I think all audiences are essentially the same. People are people, wherever you're talking to them. I think purely from a B2B point of view, one of the areas that a lot of people are beginning to lean into, and the area a lot of people I think will benefit from, is the gamification. So you look at things like Temu as a shopping experience. So traditionally, shopping experiences, UK or German shopping experiences are very clean and crisp and easy. And then you go to something like Temu, which is kind of these spinning little things.
Your brain will be fried within 10 seconds
on
there.
Exactly.
It's exciting, but I've got no idea.
No, but I mean, the retention rate is huge. The growth of retention within that shopping app is massive. And then you've got things like Duolingo. So Duolingo is, you've got people learning languages through gamification. And if you look at kind of the most boring things in the world, if you can add a gamification element to them, to the onboarding processes at work, health and safety procedures at work, any of these things that are traditionally really dull and boring and hard to get engagement with realistically, because as much as with any corporate business, people have to do these things, nobody enjoys it. Nobody puts everything into it. But if you can gamify it, then you're going to get people more interested. If you can gamify, say, the development process of somebody within work, so you start work and you want to get promoted and you want to get higher salaries and you want to kind of move up within the company. That's just what everybody wants to do. If you can gamify that and you can actually get achievements
and borrow from that other world and animate the process in a more interesting way.
Yeah, exactly.
We're in a time where it really, many people are working remotely and they think they've won. Yeah, I'm at home, but actually you're isolated. You're a unit of one. How do you bring people together? How do you make them feel pride? That's a great example of how you can borrow something from one space and bring it into another. I wonder if another one you recognize is when I think about the sort of the origins of what I think of fandom or if we go back to and yeah, you can go back to Star Wars, but I guess my first thing was Lord of the Rings when I really started going, oh my God, I'm very geeky. This is a bit of an issue. I'm collecting a lot of stuff here, or even X-Files. And one of the reasons for that was because they were some of the first ones to really go hard on DVD extras, behind the scenes, that sort of extra content that's just for me. If you've ever sat through Lord of the Rings and then gone, do you know what? I'm going to watch it again, but with the director's commentary on, you're in the same sort of area as me in terms of a glutton for punishment. But those sorts of approaches of bringing to life behind the scenes, going beyond the actual business, I think businesses are already using that, and they might not realize or identify that there's a connection between those two things. But our content challenges, actually, what are we using our different social channels for? Who's on them? And we should be thinking about how we bring that to life, because I want someone to be a fan of my business, not just a customer of my business, because then obviously they're gonna wax lyrical about it. So those the things I loved about it, and the things I've stolen and used without calling it fandom, I guess, are those sorts of expanding the world, the Spideyverse, if you will, around a brand. And for those individuals, whether for those individual companies, even if you don't think you're exciting and different, you are. Someone's going to find how you do that process on accountancy so exciting. It's not me, but there will be an audience out there. So trying to elevate that sort of content creation piece, I think, is another thing that space has done so well. And the example you gave, Disney, that's buying everything up on the planet that's got any remote sort of fandom aspect to it, there's a reason. And if you look at the Disney Channel and the sort of content, half of my time is watching the behind the scenes stuff on all of the stuff rather than the films. So there's also that sort of idea that creates value and makes me feel like I understand the business a bit more, and I'm part of that business, and I'm excited by it and the characters that make it tick. Are there other sort of examples or tropes of fandom or tribe culture or whatever, nerd culture? Are there other things that you would pick on that could be applied just as well in a sort of commercial corporate space?
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, really. It's kind of like it's giving people something that makes them feel like they're part of the story. Anything that you can do around that is really effective. So you're not selling to them anymore. And it's like we said earlier on, what makes a fandom difference to an audience is the fandom is invested, and they understand it, they're part of it, they can sort of grow it. Anything you can do with that, I think, is really important. But the same sort of goes with the brand has to listen to the audience as well. So it's find them talking and discussing and kind of coming up with new ideas. The brand has to actually take some of that on board and lead into it. And it's the same with any business as well, with the B2B stuff, so the dry corporate B2B stuff. Any way they can involve their team, their staff, so they feel like they're helping develop the company. And it might be in a very, very small way. They're going to feel more valued. They're going to feel more invested. They're going to care more, basically. So I think it's important.
I think that's probably one. If you think about the biggest challenges facing the business that we cut, someone calls people like us in and they tell you what their challenge is, and after a couple of months working with them, you know that isn't their challenge. You've seen under the hood, you can see every single other challenge. And one of the biggest ones that people have at the moment due to remote working is just how connected are our teams? How interested are they? And if you were going to start anywhere, it would be with your own team. So there's great things you can do as a CMO, pulling from the sorts of techniques that Calvin and his team are using, and all these other people are using, to try and drive some loyalty into your team, and that then flows out from there. Before we came on air, I reminded Calvin of one of my favorite films, Revenge of the Nerds. And if you've seen Revenge of the Nerds, it starts with a very butch jock. There was the jocks and the nerds, and the jocks screaming over a fence, "Nerd, nerd, nerd." And I grew up in a time when nerds were the negative. Obviously the nerd has become the owner of the world for a bit, and it's certainly, do you think it's peaked? What do you see? Because we're almost in a space where this conversation feels like actually it's the norm. This is the rich main audience. It's not the small audience. This is the real deal. What's your take on the future of nerd culture, and when is it not nerd culture anymore? Because it's so big and it's so all-consuming. What's your take on that, Calvin?
Well, this is kind of what's been really interesting over the last sort of few years, in that it used to talk about nerd culture and pop culture, and realistically, they're one and the same. Nerd culture is pop culture.
Yeah.
Like, all of the most popular movie IPs over the last sort of like 10 years are nerd things. The most popular fashion stuff is infiltrated business, high street shopping, absolutely everything. So I think nerd culture is culture. I think it's already there. I think as far as kind of businesses leaning into that and taking advantage of it, I don't think it's quite there yet. obviously more and more businesses are and starting to understand it, but it almost feels like a lot of businesses are a little bit behind where they should be, which is from a
Yeah.
marketer's point of view is kind of ideal because this is what we want. We want to be able to kind of sell our expertise and our services, and that's great. But yeah, it's not a niche thing anymore. It's so far beyond that. It dwarfs other industries. It dwarfs other aspects of culture. Realistically, nerd culture is culture.
I mean, one could argue that I would put the start of Bitcoin into nerd culture of these guys fiddling around, and now they're the richest people on the planet. And and if you think of old Elon kicking out new ideas that people thought were absolutely stupid, and that was really the huge elevation of it. I'm excited to sort of understand how it will evolve, and it's almost like they talk about it when people hire people, they talk about, oh, it's a digital native. You almost need nerd natives in your business to actually be able to. And if you haven't got them, then give Calvin a call, for God's sake. But that idea of it not being different, and it's just baked into what you're doing and your approach. Obviously, an agency and a team like you succeed on the basis that it is different to a degree for some of these organizations, and you're helping them navigate them. But there's a lot of things that you would have thought by now it was more standard, it was more normal. So, and I was trying to look at whether there was any data or numbers on sort of that elevation, and whether have we hit the peak? Is it the rise and the fall, or is it just the rise and more? And it's just now we're normalizing that. And it makes for, in a more connected digital world, it makes for a much easier way to market in many ways, because you can be much clearer about what you're saying to each group. The example you gave with the perfume company and Pikachu, well, not Pikachu, but that idea of Pokemon, that bit which I loved about what you're saying is right at the bottom. It's not just the connection, it's how does it connect to that point, and what is the story? And as I've always talked about, it all comes back to what is the story? Why should I give a toss? How do we not put shit in the world? So on your hopes for what's happening next for you, and what you're looking for, and if people wanted to get in contact with you, and what type of brands and projects would you be excited to work with? What do you want to get your teeth into as a practitioner?
I think so. So realistically, the most exciting brands to work with, and this is might be strange, is and endemic brands are great to work with. Gaming companies, any in that space, fantastic to work with. For me, the real excitement comes with working with non-endemic brands. Is working with a brand that has nothing to do with gaming or with anime or comic books or whatever it might be, and finding a genuine route for them to connect with those fans. Because that way you can do unexpected work that makes sense, but like how the hell did that happen? That's a lot more fun. So any brands
That's the most rewarding thing, though, isn't it? You actually move the dial, you surprise people, and the people within that business go, "Oh, I didn't know that we could play at this table. This is interesting."
Yeah, exactly.
So I always ask our guests on here if they've got a little bit of advice they've learned along the way, maybe from your life in nerd culture. Oops, I've dropped my pen. That's ruined the podcast. What I like to do at this point is ask the people I have on the pod if they've had a piece of advice through their journey. It might be from your journey in nerd culture. It might be something else. But is there something that stands out that you can play forward and pass on to our listeners that they can take away from today that springs to mind?
I think the biggest thing that's kind of like stuck with me through my whole career, really, this is something I was kind of told really early on, is just be a sponge, just take in absolutely everything. Just kind of like I'm obviously obsessed with comics and games and that kind of stuff, but it's the same with music and films and fashion and sports. And I think for anybody working in marketing in whatever space it might be, in the nerd space or traditional marketing, the more ingredients you've got into the mix and the more awareness you've got of different spaces, the more likely you are to spot opportunities to do something unexpected and something a little bit different. So just absorb everything is kind of what
I think you're speaking my language, my friend. And what's been interesting about asking people this question is people will spin up the idea in lots of different ways, but the thread that runs through, and it's especially true of creative people, is that curiosity or sponge-like behavior. We're so dependent on it. I mean, we're literally just you and me and people like us. We're no good unless you give us. You've got to feed us, and we'll suck it all up, and then we'll come up with something. But that's curiosity is the fundamental thing that makes us and the industry tick. I think, as certainly the creative industries. Okay, last thing, and then we're going to wrap up. I can see so many different things behind you. I can't see them in detail, but what's your top 5? What is your number one? If you had to give away everything, what were the last couple of things you're going to give away from your life in terms of your nerd culture? What is your secret sauce or most favorite thing?
So it's probably not.
He's being forced to pick. I can see Pokémon. I can see Adidas.
I've got a robot Optimus Prime here. I've got loads. It's probably this. It's probably my Lego Darth Vader, just because that's it's the first Lego kit I put together with my kid. So yeah, that's
you go.
Big one, innit? So
he's keeping it real, just in case his kid listens and he thinks Daddy does care. He's ticked that one off nicely. Well, I hope we're recording this around Christmas. I know that you get sent all sorts of lovely stuff, but I hope you get what you're hoping for this Christmas, some more Lego to do with your kid. That's what I'm asking for anyway. And I want to thank you, Calvin, for joining us today. It's been a whistle-stop tour. It's such a big subject. How can people get in contact with you if they want to learn more, if they're a brand wanting to get into this? How do they get in contact with you?
Hit me up through LinkedIn. I'm very, very active on LinkedIn. Just Calvin Innes on LinkedIn, and also just search for JVM Nerd, and you can kind of find all of our details.
Great. So we're going to put all those details in the show notes. We always forget to do that. Louis, producer, this time actually put them in the show notes. Calvin, thank you for joining us on this unedited conversation.
Thank you for having me, mate. It's been a pleasure.
That's a wrap on another episode of Unedited. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications so you never miss an episode. Find all of our updates on your favourite social media and podcast platforms. Just search for the Unedited Podcast.